Hello, this is Skylit Lake reading Deku Sensei by Bloomerbill. Chapter 11. A Phoenix Must Burn Before It Rises. Since telling his mum about the South Side, a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, even if Auntie Mitsu-chan read him the right act when they told the Bakugos. With him being at the South Side out in the open, he asked his mum about alternate over-the-counter medication or basic treatment when he noticed his students were a little sick. He would have suggested they go to the hospital if it was bad, but understood some of them couldn't afford to take the time off work or money to go to the hospital. He refused payment for his tutoring before if he knew the person was really struggling. He simply didn't need the money as much as they did, and he hadn't started working because he needed money. Near the end of the third month, he was trying to think of whether to get more blankets for the community center or coats, since it was January and a snowstorm warning was in the forecast as he rode to the South Side. He was going over the pros and cons when he got an alert from his phone. He had set up his phone to give him alerts if there was a situation going on near or in the South Side. If there was an earthquake or something, he wanted to know that before he walked into it. He took out his phone and checked what the message was about. His jaw dropped, and Izuku felt pale as he reread the alert, desperately praying in his head it wasn't true, his horror growing with every word. According to the Hero fan site, the number 2 pro hero Endeavor had been spotted by the South Side pursuing a bank robber with a speed quirk. This alone wouldn't terrify him, but most people weren't the rabidly obsessed hero fanboy he is. Izuku felt every statistic for the hero be dragged through his mind. Endeavor was single-handedly responsible for the highest property damage rates in all of Japan. The 34.6% civilian casualty rate that had been consistent for Endeavor's entire career since he left UA. The 67.3% chance of civilians that never recover from the injuries caused by Endeavor on average. Knowing all of this, the majority of the South Side was made up of outdated buildings, left Izuku a completely panicked mess. The train had never felt slower as over 1 million horrible things that could be happening cycled through his mind. When the train finally reached his stop, Izuku rushed out as fast as he could. He could see this fire raging over 3 blocks away once he was out of the station, and his heart dropped almost immediately. He saw the full horror of it all when he was inside the district, and took his phone out to call 119. When he didn't see any officials trying to control the inferno. "Emergency services, what's your emergency?" a woman calmly asked. It took Izuku a few tries to get his tongue to work correctly. Endeavor was fighting a villain nearby, and now there's a big fire. You need to send someone, please," he explained, stuttering worse than he had for a while as chaos went on around him. "Alright, sir. Please try to stay calm. Can you tell me where you are so I can send help?" she questioned. "Niigata Prefecture. I'm at Block 48 of the South Side District," Izuku rattled off, trying to calm himself down. But it was hard. There was a moment of silence for a bit before the woman spoke again. "Sir, this is an emergency line. and we didn't have time for prank calls. The Southside district has been abandoned for years now, much less the site of such a prominent hero fight. Goodbye, sir, she told him, her voice losing its previous held friendliness. Shocked, Izuku immediately tried to protest. Wait, miss! He was cut off by the click of being hung up on. Izuku redialed the number and got a different operator, but it hadn't gone much better. The man he spoke to had told him there were already people there, which he could see was a lie. Izuku had called 5 more times, but he was given to a supervisor. Sir, if you continue to call like this, we will hand your number over to the police and be pressing charges for harassment and making false claims, the stern woman told him before hanging up on him. Izuku stood there in disbelief as tears of frustration poured from his face, his mind trying to comprehend what was happening both around him and the multiple conversations he just had. Snapping back to reality, a part of Izuku that he hadn't known existed before rose as he put away his phone, and he slapped his cheeks. Then he pulled out the whistle his mum had insisted he take when he went to work, and blew it as hard as he could. The people that were around paused from their panic to stare at him. Everyone, listen up! We're starting a fire brigade, so line up! He yelled, using his teaching voice, getting straight to work organizing them to fight the fire as best as they could, without proper equipment. Later, when it would be all over, he would look back and chalked it up to the intense situation and their familiarity with them as to why they listened to him of all people. He got them to gather up water from the shorefront, as well as digging up exposed dirt and snow to throw at the fire. He helped the others lead people away from the blaze and somewhere safer. Izuku had just helped an elderly man away from a collapsed building and was about to hand him off to someone else when a child's scream pierced the air from one of the buildings that were on fire. Izuku's mind went blank, and he wasn't thinking about anything, being only subconsciously aware that he had taken off his coat as he ran into the burning building. He wasn't expecting the blackened void inside the building, with only small parts framed by blinding flames, but he pushed on with his coat pressed to his face. He couldn't remember if he called out for the child or not, but he found the kid inside a playpen with another child trying to open it while crying. Izuku didn't hesitate to scoop them both up and cover their mouths with his coat, then quickly retraced his steps to the door. Running back out, he was immediately greeted by other people pulling him away and trying to check on them. His vision was working hard to readjust to the brighter outside world when he heard a loud crash behind him. Turning, he saw the apartment building had collapsed into a fiery heap, which definitely would have killed the 3 of them if he had hesitated. He didn't get the chance to ponder his near-death experience as a hysterical woman ran over and had taken the sobbing children from him. He took a few seconds to get himself in order before he pushed himself to his feet and left his coat with the family. Izuku took off his jacket and wrapped it around his waist. The sting from the chill did wonders to clear his head, and he clapped his hands. Everyone, back to work! We still have 10 buildings to put out. Let's move! He shouted, forcing himself to go on, and keep everyone else, himself included, focused on the fire. Izuku's concept of time slipped away as he continued directing the Southsiders to keep the fire from spreading. He had also pulled a total of 5 other people from burning buildings before the earlier predicted snowstorm hit, which helped them finally put out the fire. With the threat of the fire no longer hanging over his head, he let himself take a moment to sit down against a street lamp. He stared at the remains of 2 buildings, illuminated by the embers floating in the air. Glancing around, he noticed night had fallen and took out his phone to check the time. He saw it was 22:05. He distantly acknowledged that he had spent hours there that had blurred together in his memory, and noticed he had a lot of missed calls from his mum and all the Bakugos. Even Kachan had called him. Still dazed, he called his mum, and once she picked up, she immediately launched into asking, "Izuku, are you alright? Oh baby, what happened to you? You should have been home hours ago, and then you weren't answering your phone and Upon hearing his mother's voice, the numbness from shock left him, and he broke down. He began sobbing and told her everything that had happened in the last 8 hours, ranting about how he hadn't seen one hero, officer, or firefighter the entire time he'd been there. Inko had done her best to calm him down over the phone once he began talking, and promised to come to get him as soon as possible. He would have stayed on the phone with her, but his battery was low, so they unfortunately had to hang up. As the adrenaline and shock faded, Izuku became aware of how cold it was, and how much of his body was shaking. He rubbed his arms, trying to ignore the painful sting whenever he touched a burn. He was only mildly surprised he had them, considering he had rushed in and out of burning buildings. Izuku nearly jumped when a thick blanket was wrapped around his shoulders. Turning around, he saw the leader of the Nightcrawlers, a Southside gang. The man sat next to Izuku, leaned against him, giving Izuku much needed warmth. There were a few other people around them, and one of them gave Izuku a bottle of water. No one spoke, but with the atmosphere around them, no one had to, for him to understand what they were doing. Izuku didn't say anything to them either, finding the silence to be much more fitting as people began to pull charred bodies from buildings, or what remained of them. The Southsiders took care of him until his mother arrived, being led by one of his students. Their reunion was an affair full of tears, as Inko told him how she and the Bakugos, all were, and apologized for what he had just been through. Once they'd gotten themselves partially together, Inko checked him over for injuries and a few others that were there. Before they left, Izuku had his mum write down the name of clinics for the victims to go to, then handed it to the leader, trusting him to spread it around before he left with the Inko to a hospital. He had endured the worried ranting from his auntie and gentle scolding from his uncle and mum when he got home that night. Once everything had calmed down and Izuku had some food in him, he passed out in his bed from sheer exhaustion. Izuku had managed to walk away from the incident with only minor burns from the ash and smoke inhalation that would sort itself out with some medication and a few days' rest. He had been lucky compared to the many others that day, but he didn't learn the full extent of the damages until he called in Miyake's the next day. He had also quickly learned that Endeavor's hero agency wasn't planning on paying a dime for the damages. Someone was even trying to pass it off as a freak coincidence. Izuku had called both their agency and the Hero Safety Commission to complain, but was firmly shut down by both for BS reasons. The calls had left Izuku seething in his room, absolutely livid. His respect for Auntie Mitsu-chan and Kachan had grown tenfold if this was how they felt during their fits and didn't kill anyone. He hadn't known he would feel this angry, but hearing those idiots call the South Side an abandoned den of degenerates, full of drug addicts and moronic criminals, left him pacing his room trembling with fury. The nerve of them calling his students such horrible things after having the gall of denying them the money they owed them. Izuku's eyes landed on Endeavor's collectible sitting on a shelf next to Kikukan's drawing, and had half a mind to throw it out a window. In the midst of his anger, an idea struck him. He rushed over to his computer and he checked how much money he had in the account he set up for his merchandise sales. Then he did some research into how much money it would take to build an apartment complex, his eyes falling back to his box of collectibles shortly after. Izuku genuinely might not care what happened to him, or that people had given him shit all his life for being quirkless. But the people of the South Side had, in the short 3 months he'd known them for, became much more than just his students, and they had been through quite enough in Izuku's opinion. The residents of the South Side were his people, and if no one was going to take care of his people, he would just have to take care of them himself. Chapter 12. Sowing Seeds. Uraraka Sayori was tidying up around the office. Normally, she would be drawing up plans, or she would be arranging with the contractors for project materials. But business had been slow, while construction was steady, and there would always be work. Their small, family-owned company wasn't that appealing compared to the bigger companies in the area. Both she and her husband had been forced to cut back on a lot to save up for Ochako's future schooling. Sayori felt a smile creep up on her face as she spotted the picture of their family on Takuma's desk. Becoming a hero would be very tough, but if they had to skip a meal or two, then it would be worth it if their daughter could live her dreams. That being said, she and Takuma had been praying for something to change, and for a little help, but as it was, it didn't look like that was going to happen anytime soon. There was a bit of good news, however, as she did have a meeting with a prospective client. It was arranged via email, and while Midoriya-san hadn't given her many details, she couldn't help hoping it wouldn't fall through. She was considering whether she should also sweep up the floor when there was a very timid knock at the office door, making her jump. She looked at the clock and saw it was the appointment time, and cursed herself for getting wrapped up in her worries, and checked if she looked alright, then opened the door. She was about to greet them when she saw who was there, and became confused as she stared at the young boy in the suit. He had dark green bushy hair, pulled back in a short ponytail, and was mostly plain looking, other than the freckles and bags under his eyes. The boy couldn't have been any older than Ochako. He nervously shuffled, fiddling with the handle of his briefcase. Are you Uraraka-san? The boy asked, glancing at the plate. Sayori blinked, then nodded. Yes I am, she answered, wondering if the boy was one of Ochako's friends from school. The boy stood there for a minute, then asked, Are you gonna let me in? Yes, of course, come in, Sayori said, moving out of the way. The boy walked into the office, and she led him over to her desk. The boy sat himself down in the chair across from her. "Please forgive me for asking, but who are you?" Sayori questioned as she sat down at her chair. She's certain Ochako would know better than to invite friends over to the office without telling them first, and the prospective client would likely be here any moment. The boy looked confused for a moment, then realization crossed his face and he bowed. "I apologize for not introducing myself, Uraraka-san. My name is Midoriya. I arranged a meeting with you about perhaps hiring you for a project." The boy, Midoriya-san, told her. That certainly surprised her. Sayori gave the boy another look over, searching for any signs of the boy being older than he appeared, but came up with nothing. "I see. Forgive me for asking, but how old are you, Midoriya-san?" she asked, because there would be one of two things happening right now. On one hand, Midoriya-san might be a boy her daughter's age looking to hire a construction company for some god-forsaken reason. Or Midoriya-san might be one of those very few born with a quirk that stopped their aging process. In which case, she'd be very embarrassed and owe the man an apology. The boy flinched, but answered anyway. I'll be 13 in July, Uraraka-san." The boy averted his gaze and fiddled with his sleeve, while Sayori blinked, feeling confused. "Oh, I'm sorry, Midoriya-san, but I'm not sure we can do business with someone as young as you," she explained, unable to keep from feeling a bit disappointed at the apparent lack of business. The boy didn't look too shocked by her response, and instead fished out some papers from his briefcase and placed them on the desk. "Legally speaking, you can, so long as the person in question is quirkless, which I am, Uraraka-san," he said, taking out an ID card and putting it on the papers. Sayori stared at the boy in disbelief, then turned to the papers and saw it was a printout of some law in regard to the quirkless that indeed confirmed what Midoriya said, and looking at the boy's license confirmed the boy's age and his status as a quirkless person. She probably ended up staring at the document for a minute or two too long, but she was honestly in shock. For one, she had never heard of this law, and she did double check it by looking it up on her phone to confirm the outrageous but quite real law. And secondly, Sayori had no idea what to do with this knowledge. "Uraraka-san," Midoriya-san timidly called, getting her attention. She put her phone away and turned back to Midoriya-san. Right. Well, what project do you want us to do?" Sayori questioned, nervously shifting in her chair. Should she really be entertaining the boy's request, whatever it was? Midoriya-san brightened up and he pulled out some more papers from his briefcase. I wanted to have an apartment complex built, 3 floors, not including the basement, with about 15 units, Midoriya-san explained, showing her some of the rough blueprints he'd made, which was more of a floor plan than anything else. Going over them with the boy, Sayori realized this was probably going to be one of the biggest projects they would have done if she accepted the job. The units would be simple: 2 small bedrooms, living room, kitchenette, and a small bathroom, but they would need to be built from the ground up, from what Midoriya-san was saying. Just running the basic numbers, Sayori knew this was a costly endeavor, both for the company and the boy. How long do you think this is going to take to build? Midoriya-san asked, startling Sayori out of her thoughts. Oh, if you're talking about when people could move in, perhaps about 6 months if our crew could use their quirks, she answered, and Midoriya-san nodded. That would be preferable, he muttered. Yes, but Midori-san, this will cost quite a lot of money. 693,270,000 yen at least, Sayori warned, only to be met by Midori-san's green eyes burning with an emotion she couldn't exactly place. I'll pay you half up front, as soon as we sign a contract, he told her firmly. Sayori bulked and stared at the boy shocked. Was she being punked right now? Or was this boy some kind of millionaire? 346,653,000 yen up front? She quickly looked around the office for any sort of camera or possible listening device, but after a minute concluded that this was indeed a serious offer. She returned her attention to the greenet. I'll have to survey the site to make sure it's zoned for residential before we could get permits and draw up a contract. So where is this being built, Midoriya-san? Sayori inquired, very much questioning whether or not this was really happening. Midoriya-san's confidence left him, and he shrunk into himself, suddenly nervous. Nagata Prefecture, Block 49 of the South Side District, he quickly replied, and Sayori's stomach dropped. She knew about the South Side. She knew what doing business in the South Side meant, and Midori-san seemed to notice her distress. Uraka-san, I can guarantee that there will be no trouble for you or your employees if you take this job. Nothing illegal or immoral. I just want your help to replace an apartment complex that burnt down recently, honestly. Midori-san promised, borderline pleading with her. Sayori squirmed in her chair, feeling conflicted as she thought of what to do. Was she so desperate for money to be so morally bankrupt as to accept a sketchy job in a red light district and take millions from a child no older than her daughter? She bit the tip of her thumb as she ran numbers in her head. The pros and the cons of taking the job, the possible risks of working in the South Side, the difference of 3 million yen would make for everyone in the company. The thing that probably made up her mind was the resigned look that Midori-san made when she didn't say anything, like he was expecting her to reject the job. Sayori gulped and told him, I'd like to examine the area in person and draw up the blueprints, and if we can get the permit to do so, we'll get a contract made up for the work. The boy all but jumped and stared at her, genuinely shocked. Then his entire form was trembling from the joy he radiated. Midoriya-san immediately stood up and began bowing to her. Thank you, Uraka-san. You have no idea what this means to me, he exclaimed, and Sayori became flustered. It's not a big deal, she mumbled, but Midoriya brushed her off, still very cheerful. When can you come to the site? I'll personally escort you, he offered, and Sayori had to dig out her daily planner, since she was unable to remember a day off the top of her head. Perhaps the day after tomorrow at 5:30 p.m.? She suggested, and Midoriya-san nodded, head moving rapidly. That'll be perfect. I'll meet you at Sakiya Station, he told her, writing down something on one of her papers, then handing it to her. Midoriya-san bowed again. "Thank you for working with me, Uraka-san. Here is my contact details. Please inform me if something comes up before we meet. Good day, Uraka-san," he said, then left the office with a wave before she could say a word. Sayori blinked, then glanced down at the paper, finding a phone number as well as the address of the station, with details of how to get there. She sighed, rubbing her forehead, wondering what kind of trouble her spur-of-the-moment choice would no doubt bring. Hello, my dear friends. I hope you enjoy this new installment of Deku Sensei. We have finally hit our first major, not arc. I think all of the chapters so far are just like the kind of like the prelogue. Well, technically the pre-prelogue. Is that the epilogue? Prologue. The pre-prologue. Because now we're going into the prologue of the story. Like we had out the big fire was, I believe so if I remember correctly, the big turning point for Izuku, which like obviously it's such an important detail, and that's really made him start moving it up and doing more stuff. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my thing. I'm not sure how I'm going to sound in recording because I did play around with my voice today, trying to find the balance for Izuku's voice. It was really hard. Then I just did a generic female voice for Uraka Sayori. So yeah, but to be fair, all my feminine voices sound very much alike. I mean, to be fair, being AMAB makes it really hard, especially since all the things I learned is just self-taught. Like I've had all the things. I should really get some YouTube videos up to how to do voice training so I can get that multiple angles for the voice. But like, I don't know. I'll have to do that later. But because I'm busy and it's almost time for me to go to sleep. For first food, I'm gonna have a single sausage and maybe potatoes. Anyway, bye.